everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Elena Sturman. I am the President and CEO of the Glaucoma Foundation. Our mission is to improve the lives of glaucoma patients by identifying and funding innovative substantive research that will lead to better diagnostics and treatment, and providing education for physicians and patients. From the first diagnosis throughout their treatment, if you are a glaucoma patient, you will have to absorb a lot of information. You may not know what questions to ask or forget to raise particular concerns. Research shows that half of the patients will leave their doctor's office without understanding their condition or what they need to do next. We hope that webinars like this one will aim you with information that will help to reduce your anxiety and be proactive in your care. We are very fortunate to have Dr. Berdal with us today, who is going to talk about therapies for glaucoma that are now safe, more effective, and more tailored to patients' needs than ever before. Dr. Berdal is widely regarded as one of the leading international cataract surgeons. He is one of the very few surgeons in the United States who is also fellowship trained in cornea, glaucoma, and refractive surgery, and he has already performed more than 25,000 eye surgeries around the globe. His published work has primarily focused on fundamental causes of glaucoma, minimally invasive glaucoma surgery, and astigmatism management during and after cataract surgery. Dr. Berdal has been involved in numerous clinical trials on some of the most exciting technologies in ophthalmology. He has also founded Balon Laser, which is developing the first non-surgical, non-pharmacologic way to lower eye pressure for glaucoma treatment. Although Dr. Berdal has many accomplishments, his primary driver is the trust that people place in him, particularly in meeting his patients in their moments of vulnerability and putting their needs first. I am very pleased to welcome Dr. Berdal to today's webinar, Light at the End of Tunnel Vision, the latest directions in glaucoma care, to discuss updates in surgical technologies, drug and new drug delivery, new lasers, and what's just around the corner. As always, there will be a question and answer session at the end of the presentation. You can ask a question by using chat or Q&A button, and we will do our best to answer as many questions as we can. Welcome, Dr. Berdal. Let's begin.
Thanks, Elena. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be here. And I, like so many, I'm inspired and benefit from the work that you and the team do at the Glaucoma Foundation. So thank you. And so we're going to talk about the light at the end of tunnel vision. And I bet almost everybody on this webinar remembers the moment that they were told that they had glaucoma. And I bet almost everybody said, I've heard of that disease. And I bet almost everybody says, is there something I can do to not go blind? And that moment of fear, that moment of vulnerability is one of those times where you probably remember exactly where you were. And what I'm here to do today is to say that there's a light at the end of that tunnel vision, and there are a lot of people working hard so that you live a fully sighted life. And so we're going to talk a little bit about where we started 150 years ago and the technologies that have been developed since then. And then we'll probably spend about half of our time about what's around the corner with new technologies and how they may help address the needs of glaucoma patients. And so with that, we'll get started. And I think it's important to share entire transparency. So I consult with a lot of companies. The closest one to my heart is one that we started called Balance Ophthalmics. And we'll talk about that technology a bit, but I consult with a lot of companies. And honestly, the reason why you do this is because I think that doctors need to be a part of setting the true north, where companies and technologies bring these forward so that they're actually helping people, providing fair value, and then also encouraging the next step as iron sharpens iron as we're trying to get these technologies. So here is where we start. And if we rewound the clock, 100 years or so, this is about the amount of hope that we had when someone was diagnosed with glaucoma. And there wasn't much that we could do at all, except for maybe, drilling some archaic, borderline barbaric hole in the eye back then. And then, a number of years ago, the first drug class for glaucoma was developed, and those are drugs in the family of pilocarpine. And what they would do is they would constrict the pupil and they would open up the outflow angle to try and help get fluid out of the eye. And this was a major advancement to have an eye drop that could be used for glaucoma. But these drugs aren't great. We still use them today. Sometimes, and in fact, they're getting repurposed for the treatment of presbyopia, which is for up close vision. But at the concentrations that you needed for glaucoma and the frequency that you needed them for glaucoma, which is about 4 times a day, they'd cause headache. They'd make pupils small. They'd make future cataract surgery different. But that circle of hope was just a little bit bigger. And then we moved to trabeculectomy. And versions of this were available prior to pilocarpine, but then the trabeculectomy came along. And what's fascinating to me about this is that this surgery is still done, and it's still the most effective treatment for glaucoma. Of all the treatments we have, this one is probably the most effective, and it's also the riskiest. And if we could find a way to get the benefit from surgeries like this without the risk, kind of like, in your financial portfolio, you want to try to find the benefit without the risk, but it's really hard to do. That's what we would like with these surgeries. And so we still perform surgeries like this and others that maybe tried like tube shunts. So this would be something like the Ahmed tube shunt, the Bearvelt tube shunt, there was the Maltino, there were a number of different tube shunts that were developed, and to try and limit some of the risks that come along with traditional glaucoma surgery, specifically trabeculectomy. But they don't work quite as well. They probably are a little less risky. But again, with every new technology, none of these are bad. They all increase that circle of hope and increase the light at the end of the tunnel. And so as a glaucoma specialist, what I want is I want the tools available to me so that I can match the right tool to your eye, not fit your eye to whatever tool I'm good at or whatever tools are available. I want as big of a toolkit as possible. And then timolol came along. And timolol is a beta blocker eye drop, and it was a game changer because it was generally well tolerated and worked pretty well, although the duration of action was short, and it doesn't lower IOP that well at night. But it was well tolerated with the exception of patients that had difficulty breathing because of asthma or COPD. But so many patients got benefit, and we still use this drug regularly today. In fact, oftentimes it's the standard that we use in controlled trials to compare against to see if a technology is at least as good, or the 25-cent word we use is non-inferior to timolol. And that's actually a bar that a lot of technologies can't get beyond. And then came prostaglandins. And prostaglandins were a huge game changer because now instead of using drops twice a day or 3 times a day, and there were a lot of patients where the side effects were intolerable. Prostaglandins, I believe, were the first billion-dollar drug in probably in ophthalmology, but certainly in glaucoma care. And this saved so many people from going blind. Now, one thing I want to point out so far is that all of these treatments are really aimed at patients that have high eye pressure glaucoma. Or at least that's where they work the best. Now, trabeculectomy, and maybe to a lesser degree tube shunts, they still work on patients whose pressures are in the normal range. But for most of these therapies, you'll find that they work better when the pressure is higher and don't work as well when the pressure is, say, 15, 16, 17 millimeters of mercury or lower. And then we keep on the eye drop bandwagon, and thank goodness, and we've got things like dorzolamide and brimonidine, and for a while we hoped, and some people still hope, that maybe brimonidine had some neuroprotection elements because you could see that maybe the visual field didn't get quite as bad, even if for a lesser lowering of IOP, and we wonder about that. And then we get more convenient with combinations of brimonidine and timolol, or timolol and dorzolamide, and those are nice because it's one less drop that patients would have to take. But I want you to know that the reason why we don't have all of these combination medications out there is because the FDA requires, and it's reasonable, to show that the combination is better than one alone. And that's actually fairly hard to do in a clinical trial, and clinical trials are expensive and bear a lot of risk. And so that's why you don't see, in the United States anyway, a combination, an FDA cleared or approved product combination medication with Xalatan and others, because they would have to show that the addition of the medication consistently lowered the IOP further. And then you move to selective laser trabeculoplasty. And the story behind this is a great story of innovation, which is that I believe that it was at Mass Eye, but it could have been Hopkins, so forgive me if I'm wrong to somebody who's paying attention. But they were trying to create glaucoma models. So they were shining a laser into the trabecular meshwork, which is the outflow pathway of the eye, hoping to raise the pressure, so that then they could use eye drops and different surgical techniques to show that it could be lowered. So they were trying to create a model of glaucoma, and they come back in and they said, we failed. We can't raise the pressure. It only lowers the pressure. And the professor says, wait a second, that's exactly what we're trying to do in the first place. It's not a failure. It's just that you skipped a go and got to free parking and are solving the problem to start with. And so SLT, I've been in practice for 15 years. SLT has been part of my practice the entire time, ALT before that. So this has been around 30 years. And recently there was a big study called the LIGHT trial that was out of the UK that is really pushing us into making this first line treatment. But what's amazing about that to me is that it's about 30 years or so, forgive me if I'm off by 5 to 10, before a technology that was developed becomes the standard of treatment for what we would do. And why this, and now look at how big our kind of circle of hope is becoming. There's all of these tools that we have to apply to the patient when we need it. But one of the things that makes SLT so exciting is that the patient isn't responsible for taking the eye drops and showing up to the pharmacy and getting the new thing. And the side effects are minimal. And, you know, it can be repeated and last, you know, typically 3 years. And so SLT, I think, should be the first thing that we do in patients that have glaucoma. Now, there's people that'll write me and say I'm wrong about that, and I might be, but I think that the way that we're moving, and if it was, and the question you should always ask your doctor, and never shy away from this question, is what you would do, what would you do if it was your eye, or what would you do if it was your mom? And our job is to take the peer-reviewed literature, take our own experience, take what makes sense to us, formulate all that complex information into, if I was in your situation and it was me, what would I do? And that I every time a patient asks me that question, I know that I'm grateful for it because it distills it all down into the right thing. And that's where trust is at. So there's a bunch of benefits of SLT. So now we started kind of with drops, then we went to surgery, then we went to a whole bunch of drops. Now here's the first new category of laser that started with ALT and goes to SLT. And so that's what we had for a while until the advent of the iStent, which ushered in an entirely new category known as MIGS, or minimally invasive glaucoma surgery. And MIGS has really changed things. And actually, frankly, it was important for my career because MIGS was coming out right when a couple of years after I was started in practice. And that allowed me to see, to be involved in clinical trials early. And for a while, our volumes were such that we contributed meaningfully to the literature and had some of the largest data sets that were out there. And what we showed in the real world data sets is that you would get people's pressure on average down from 20 plus drops to about 15 or 16 plus drops. So maybe 4, 5 millimeters of mercury and cut the drops in half. And what you would see over time is that eye pressure would stay the same over 7, 8, 9. We've got out to 10 years now that we haven't published yet, but we've got data out to 10 years. But what would happen is that the medications would creep back. So we were able to keep the pressures low, but in order to keep them low that long, the medications would creep back. And at 7 and 8 years, it's back to about the baseline for medications, but the eye pressure is still about 4 millimeters of mercury lower than the baseline. What does that mean to you as a patient? And how do I think about that as a doctor? Well, to me, if I'm going inside your eye to do cataract surgery and you have glaucoma, you're getting one of these or some MIGS procedure, most likely a stent for me. You're getting that. And what do you benefit from that? Well, it's very safe. Probably the meaningful risk is that there's a chance of bleeding and that bleeding goes away. But what I really think I'm buying for you is time. So if I can buy you 5 years, 10 years, maybe even longer before we have to move to a more aggressive glaucoma surgery like a tube shunt, a trabeculectomy, or even a subconjunctival approach like a Zen, which I'll show you in a second, I've bought maybe a decade. And if you look at the tube versus trab trial, the 5-year failure rates of those surgeries were 30 to 40%, maybe even up to 50%, depending on the failure criteria you use. So if we can avoid those big glaucoma surgeries in younger patients, that's a win for them. Plus the risk is so low. So in my mind, it's why wouldn't we do this as the first step? More or less, the worst thing that's going to happen is that it didn't get you where you need to be. And you and I both know that we've exhausted our options and now what's left on the table has more risk. Now, if you're a patient that had a trabeculectomy at age 30, that doesn't mean your doctor made a mistake, okay? Because you could have had really bad glaucoma, really high eye pressure, really low eye pressure with glaucoma. It doesn't mean that. It means that as our tools expand, there's more art, there's more colors on our palette that we can use to try and take care of your glaucoma. But for me, if you have cataract surgery and you've got mild to moderate glaucoma, you're getting a MIGS procedure. And I'll look you in the eye and tell you this is what you need to do to buy the time for your glaucoma. And then there's a proliferation of MIGS procedures. So let me tell you a story when I was in residency. When I was in residency, we did goniotomies. A goniotomy is where we remove the trabecular meshwork in kids because they had a congenital abnormality where the fluid would not flow through that outflow drainage pathway that we call the trabecular meshwork. Now, the dogma was this doesn't work in adults. And God bless those doctors that say, why? That doesn't make sense to me. But dogma is pervasive in life. It's also pervasive in medicine. Thankfully, in medicine, we believe in the scientific method where we make a hypothesis and we test it and do the data to see if what we believed before is still true or not. And so MIGS challenged that. Up on the left here, you can see this thing that looks like a little bit of a foot. That's the Cahook dual blade. And that's to perform goniotomies, usually in adults. And it has a little wedge that lifts up the trabecular meshwork and cuts it on both sides so that the area of resistance is bypassed. If you look up on the top, there's a hydrous stent. Now, my eye stent, which is what we're talking about down here on the bottom left, that was the first generation, and it's actually considerably smaller than that hydrous on the top right. But what those do is they act as a conduit where you pierce the trabecular meshwork, the fluid flows across the device, kind of like if you had leaves over a drain and you put a PVC pipe in the middle of it so the fluid could go through. That's what these devices do. And I want to say kudos to both Glaukos and the Ivantis team who brought these devices to market because they were big, difficult to perform FDA studies that resulted in what's called a pre-market approval clearance, which is the most strenuous way to get an approval. So we have really great data on the safety and the efficacy of these devices. If you look over to the bottom right, that's another one that you may encounter with your glaucoma surgeons, and that's called the Omni. That's the device as we hold it in our hand. And what that does is it does two things. It goes into the trabecular meshwork and it injects a gel to expand it. Think about expanding your cardiac vessels if you've got a narrowing or a blockage. This device goes in there and expands the drainage pathway. And then there is a nylon fiber that comes out, and that allows us to remove the trabecular meshwork, which is the site of resistance. These four procedures are probably account for over 95% of the MIGS category. And there's some other devices, primarily like the Cahook dual blade up on the top, that and like the Omni, that are out there to try and provide surgeons with different ways to remove the trabecular meshwork. And then if you look over to the left, you see the Zen gel implant. And the Zen, I wouldn't really put in the MIGS category because it's subconjunctival, but it is less invasive than the tube and the trab that we started with at the beginning of our Circle of Hope. And so that device can be either put in from the inside of the eye out or the outside of the eye in, and it acts as a tube, and it comes like a really tiny macaroni noodle. And once you put it in the eye, that macaroni noodle absorbs that fluid in the eye and hydrates, just like a macaroni noodle would that you put in water. And so that's it, soft and pliable underneath the conjunctiva, and it shunts fluid from inside the eye to underneath the eye. Now, what I want you to know about that, and one of the reasons why I wouldn't put it in the MIGS category, is it does have more safety issues where the eye pressure can get too low. Or that and it is dependent on how a patient heals. And so there can be healing and scarring around that device, which means that we have to go in and remove some of that scar tissue or go to an alternative surgery. So that's, in my practice, and I think most practices, reserved for a bit more aggressive glaucoma. And I would prefer to do that over a tube shunt or a trabeculectomy in the middle. But we still, if that fails, then we generally move to a tube shunt, occasionally a trabeculectomy, but usually a tube shunt. So that gets us to the MIGS era. And then drugs come back alive, but drugs in a different form. And there is a category of drug that I don't have on here, which is Rho kinase inhibitors. Ropressin, Rocklatan are the names of those drugs. They're a new category of drug. We think that it works on the traditional outflow pathway, the uveal scleral outflow pathway, but also lowers what we call episcleral venous pressure, which is a backstop for lowering IOP. So maybe it works a little bit better in patients that have lower IOP to start with, but that's not widely available in the literature. But patients still have to take the drug, and it still has to not bother their ocular surface too much or change the pigmentation of their skin. And the cornea doesn't like the drug. The cornea doesn't want the drug. In fact, the cornea, which is the surface of your eye, its job is kind of threefold. One, let light through. Two, bend light. Number three, give the eye structure and keep things out of the eye itself. So it's designed to keep stuff out of your eyeball. And we are trying to design drugs to get the drug into your eyeball. So it's kind of us versus God, and God usually wins in those fights with us, but we can kind of be sneaky and find ways to design drugs so that they can penetrate inside the eye. But what we have learned, and where I think this is going, and the next wave of the current wave of glaucoma innovation is in drug delivery. And that's the Durysta. And that takes a drug that's in that xalatan family. This happens to be bimatoprost. And it injects it into the eye. You can do it in the clinic. And so it comes preloaded in an injector. We give you a numbing drop. We inject it into your eye and the drug goes there. And that means there is way less drug than there was to get on the surface of your eye. We don't have to overwhelm the cornea to get the drug in the eye. And then it's there working only where we need it and not where we don't. Now, the Durysta lasts, it's labeled to last 4 months. I think that 70% of the time or so, it lasts 6 months. There's reports that it can last longer than that. And honestly, when I started, when this got approved, I thought I'm not going to use it very much because it's only approved for 4 months and it's not approved for re-administration. And I was wrong. And we use quite a bit of it, even if it's only giving a 4-month break for patients. They love that 4 to 6 month break. Their ocular surface gets a break. Occasionally, we will re-administer it. That's off-label. I'm not trying to promote that. It's just that it can be done, and our oath is to do the right thing for the patient that's there in front of us and use all these tools in the best way for that patient. Our oath is not to what the insurance company is going to reimburse. It's not to, it's not even to, and whatever the FDA label says. What our oath is to do is to try and find a way to take care of that patient that's right in front of us. And, the FDA and labels and things like that are there to help guide us and ensure that we've got the proper data to make good decisions for us. So the new wave of glaucoma care is drug delivery. And the next one to come, so Durysta is really the first one to get wide acceptance. The next one is the iDose. And we were in the clinical trials for this, and a number of these things we were in the clinical trials for. And I'm really excited about this product. The label, the primary endpoint was for 3 months, but the phase 2 data shows that it should last for about 3 years. And so now I expect that it'll last about 70% of patients were still getting IOP lowering at 3 years. So I think of it as lasting about 6 times as long as a Durysta would. And again, you're getting the drug only where you need it. And so I've done a number of these. This was FDA approved, I think, in December. It was, they do have their coding and reimbursement in place. So insurance coverage should be, not complete, but fairly widespread this summer and be available to us. And now you think about, you have lasers, you have MIGS, you've got drug delivery, and all of those things that are on the outer part of this circle help us avoid the things that are in the inner part of this circle. So they become more patient-friendly. Maybe not more effective, but very effective, more convenient for patients, less dependent on did you get the drops in the eye, and fewer compromises patients have to make in terms of how their eye looks, how comfortable their eye is, dryness, etc. And so that circle of hope is getting even wider. And now let's move on to things that aren't available yet, but widen the circle a bit more. And that's something called the Balon Laser, which is a recently approved, but it's not, I don't think it's commercially available yet, but should be soon, which takes this SLT laser that we had on the top and makes it even easier with not having to penetrate the eye with the laser. It goes externally. And we're excited about what that's going to provide to our patients, and that should be available shortly because it is FDA cleared and approved. And now this is one that's near and dear to my heart, and I'll say that I will try to be objective about this, but I can't because this was something that, you know, I thought of, and I'll take a moment just to describe the genesis of this product, and then we'll move into one other one and take questions. Rewind the clock. I've earned this gray beard because I've been in practice for 15 years, but I was a first-year resident and I went scuba diving. And so if there's any scuba divers out there, you know that if you go down 30 feet or 10 meters, you add 1 atmosphere of pressure to your entire body. That's 760 millimeters of mercury. Now, if your eye pressure is 25 millimeters of mercury, it's high. And if it's 60 millimeters of mercury, we're drilling a hole in your eye today. We're talking 760 millimeters of mercury of pressure that's added to your eyeball when you scuba dive just 30 feet. And instead of enjoying my scuba dive, I was thinking, how is that possible? And I came to believe that glaucoma is not just a disease of eye pressure. It's a disease of eye pressure and likely cerebral spinal fluid pressure, where you have a high eye pressure or a low CSF pressure. And that difference between the two across the back of the optic nerve where glaucoma occurs, that pressure difference, if eye pressure is higher, causes the optic nerve to cup and bow backwards. So I came back from this scuba diving trip and said to one of my professors, hey, I think I figured out what glaucoma is. It's a balance between these two pressures. And he said, you're wrong. Somebody else would have thought of that. Go back on call. So I did what any good adolescent would do. I went to a different parent and I said, hey, I think I figured out what glaucoma is. This is Rand Allingham, one of my heroes. And he said, I think you're wrong, but go study it. And that was the difference. So we went and looked at that and found that indeed patients that had glaucoma had a low CSF pressure. We published that, and since that time, a number of people have reconfirmed these findings. In fact, they've taken monkeys and lowered, without changing eye pressure, and lowered their cerebral spinal fluid pressure. And I don't know if I said this, that's the fluid that bathes the brain. So if you do a spinal tap, that's the fluid that you're taking out, unlike the fluid inside the eye. And it's those two pressures that are different. And so we found that indeed CSF pressure was lower. If you take monkeys and you lower their CSF pressure, they get glaucoma, even if you didn't change their IOP. So I had this idea and I thought, well, I don't know what to do with this. And so ultimately, through talking with my partner and some others, we came up with the idea that, well, if you go underwater and eye pressure has to go up inside your eye. As you go up, it goes down, but we need to decouple that from CSF pressure. What if we just took a pair of goggles, put them on your eye, draw a little vacuum in the goggles? And what that does is it takes some of that atmospheric weight off your eye, and the eye pressure has to go down. So think about it like this. If I pushed on your eye with my finger, your eye pressure would have to go up. And if we took some of the, and then if I took my finger off, your eye pressure would have to go down. It's just based on physics. And so we developed this and have done a number of clinical trials, a number of data in the peer-reviewed literature. And in fact, we just had an FDA panel meeting, which is kind of the highest level of scrutiny for the FDA, and had a unanimous vote at that panel for that the benefits outweigh the risks. And so we're hopeful that we'll have this FDA approved and it'll usher in a new class of therapy that is not a drug and not surgery. And the data is quite compelling now. A couple of things: it only works while it's on. We expect most patients would wear it at night because eye pressure has a tendency to go up at night. And we don't have labeling yet, and we aren't FDA approved yet. So I'm not trying to promote a non-FDA approved product. I'm just trying to educate about what's coming potentially in the future. But eye pressure has a tendency to go up at night. And importantly, and we expect that this will be who it's indicated for, is in patients whose pressure is less than 21, where a lot of these other therapies don't work as well, because we believe that at night when eye pressure goes up is a time that's vulnerable for a glaucoma progression. So stay tuned. I don't know for sure how long until this will be FDA approved. I don't even know for sure that it will be, but I'm hopeful that it will be, and where insurance coverage is coming. And so that'll be a new category of care. And then the last thing, and now look at how big our circle of hope is. There's almost no black remaining, and the light at the end of the tunnel doesn't look like a light at the end of the tunnel. It's just light. And so the last one is neuroprotection. And glaucoma is an optic neuropathy. And so the optic nerve deteriorates in glaucoma. We know for sure it's related to high eye pressure. I believe that for sure it's related to high eye pressure or cerebral spinal fluid pressure. But when you think about that, then you say, why do people with normal eye pressure get glaucoma or get worse? Well, because I believe it's because they have a lower CSF pressure. And so now you still have a difference there, where if you had a high eye pressure and a high CSF pressure, no big deal, there's no difference. If you have a low eye pressure and an even lower CSF pressure, that differential still exists. And in fact, in Japan, 80 to 90% of people that have glaucoma don't ever have a high eye pressure. And so clearly there's something fundamental about the disease that we don't understand. And that's why we talk about neuroprotection. Is there something, a drug or an approach that we can take, or something genetic, where we can actually protect the nerve so that it gets the metabolic needs met and the metabolic wastes are removed? And that's one of the most exciting areas of research. And one of the things that's great about medicine and the pace of innovation is that things can build on each other. So maybe it's that we've got an idea for a drug, and that creates an idea for imaging, and that creates a refinement to the drug. Or maybe it's the imaging comes first. And hey, we're able to actually look at individual cells or individual mitochondria and whether they're able to traverse into the eye, or some marker that nerve is about to die. And if we can rescue it before it sends its apoptosis signal and involutes on itself, we can protect the optic nerve. And so here's where we started. And I want to just have a quick shout out to Hillary Golden, who's so great at educating and talking about just imagining what it would be like if this is all we had. That little tiny dot of hope was just a small hole, a hole that we could drill in the eye at the beginning, and we didn't have any other options. And now that little light has turned into something that's more like this, and hopefully we can keep people sighted all of their lives. And with that, I'll stop and take any questions that folks may have.
Thank you so much, Dr. Berdahl. Amazing, amazing presentation. Our participants have been writing questions ferociously. I would like to apologize ahead of time because I'm not sure we'll be able to cover all of them, but we'll try our best. And let's start. So here's the first question, Dr. Berdahl. Thank you for this excellent webinar. Can you please speak about Preserve of Flaw Micros shunts for glaucoma surgery?
Yes, I can. Thank you for the kind words. And Preserve of Flaw is not available in the United States, but it is available in Canada, outside the United States, and in Australia, where it's actually doing quite well. I have put these in outside the United States in clinical trial, and we're hopeful that it can get approved in the United States, and but it is going to go through another clinical trial in order to do that. So for availability in the United States, it's going to be a little while, but it is promising. I would say that it is not a new category, though. It is still subconjunctival, meaning kind of like Zen tube shunts, trabeculectomies, but it looks like it may have a favorable safety profile or a more favorable safety profile, and that's probably why it's done well in some of the other countries around the world.
Thank you very much. Next question. Would you advise Repressa for someone with edema of the cornea plus glaucoma?
This question is meant for me because I do cornea and glaucoma. And it's a very smart question by Dorothy. Thank you. The reason she's asking that is because rho kinase inhibitors have been shown to have perhaps some endothelial cell protection function in addition to their glaucoma work. I think you can try it and see if it helps. My experience is that it does not help with corneal edema. In fact, it creates typically this beautiful, almost lattice shaped or lattice pattern on the cornea that doesn't help vision, but it's reversible when stopping it. So I don't think that there's any downside to trying it. I just don't have a lot of hope that it's going to be effective.
Thank you very much. Next question. Which therapies, surgical, preservative-free eye drops, work best for patients with normal tension glaucoma?
Yeah, not a lot work that great. So the thing that works the best that's currently available is trabeculectomy, probably followed by tube shunts and like a Zen-like procedure. Eye drops will lower eye pressure in patients with normal tension glaucoma, but only a little. And so, that is one of the areas that we think that the new goggles, which will be hopefully known as the OPAP, the ocular pressure adjusting pump, would be helpful for. One other new technology that's not too far away that I failed to mention is something by a company called Vialaze. The procedure is called Flight. And instead of using the type of laser that's used in SLT, it's a femtosecond laser, which actually physically removes the trabecular meshwork. And another one is another laser, but this one you go inside the eye for. I'm actually supposed to be in Panama this weekend doing this procedure, which is called ELT, which is a procedure that uses a laser to punch little holes right in the trabecular meshwork. Again, neither of these are really a new category, just a better way to do some of the work that we're doing already.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Next question. How long would tube shunts last without the need for eye drops?
Yeah, it's very varied. So the tube versus trab data would say that at 5 years, about 30% of tube shunts have failed. The good news is if you get through that 5 years, they can last a really long time. Some patients, you put a tube shunt in and they need their glaucoma drops from the very beginning. Some patients never need them again. And I hate that answer when you just say it depends. It's true. But if I had to ballpark it, I would say that of my patients that have a tube shunt, over 50% of them are also on a glaucoma drop.
Thank you very much. Next question. I have become allergic to preservatives in eye drops. What could you recommend as preservative-free drugs for glaucoma?
Yeah, there are some preservative-free glaucoma medications that are available, and there are some technologies that are working on preservative-free. So there's a company called TearClear that has the preservative in the bottle, and you maybe have seen some lubricating drops that were removed from the market because they were associated with infections because they didn't have preservative. So there's a company called TearClear that has a tip that removes the preservative from the medication. So as the drop passes through the tip, the medication is, the preservative is removed. And I'm hopeful that'll get onto the market. There's also a company called Imprimis that has compounded medications, and it can have combo medications. Now, these are not FDA cleared, but they are those medications, and doctors can order compounded medications on behalf of their patients, and they're not that expensive, which is a really great option. So that's you can talk to your doctor about it. It's Imprimis, Imprimis, and we use a fair amount of those drops for patients.
Thank you very much. Next question. CMS was on the verge of no longer reimbursing for MIGS procedures. Why would that have to come up to begin with? And what is the likelihood that it would still go away? I mean, it's more of a philosophical question for you, Dr. Birdal.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm so glad that we still have those tools in the toolkit. We need those options for our patients. Now, could some of those technologies have generated more robust data at the very beginning? Yeah, they could have. But they've been around long enough that now there is a bunch of data and a bunch of experience with it and real world evidence to help support these things. So, you know, since it's a philosophical question, I'll get philosophical for a moment. We've got an less than ideal triad where you've got insurers, patients, doctors, and insurers pay the doctors, and doctors take care of the patients, and patients pay the insurers. And so the insurers would like to not pay the doctors or for the technologies. The doctors want to take care of their patients and get reimbursed for doing that. And the patients feel like, hey, I paid all of this money into my insurer. They should take care of me when I need it. And so I think that we need to continue to make sure that insurers do pay for the technologies, and the sacredness in the relationship comes from when I look a patient in the eye, or when a doctor looks a patient in the eye and says, I'm here with you shoulder to shoulder alongside you, gonna do everything we have in our power to keep you sighted all your life. And if doctors and patients aren't making those decisions, but a box checker and an insurance company is the one that's driving it, we are going to end up in a worse spot for care. And so I agree with you. Why would that even happen in the first place?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Next question is, what is the cost of Durista?
Oh boy, I can Google it while we're talking right here. I know actually the drug itself costs, I think, $2,450 or $2,500. I think that the administration of it is a few $100s. So that's what it costs the insurance company. Rough, probably $3,000, $4,000, something like that would be my guess. And then if your insurance covers it, and depending on what type of insurance you have in a copay, it can cost you nothing, or it can cost very little, or it can cost a lot, depending on where you are with your insurance company and your deductible.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Next question. Do these treatments that you discussed affect dry eye?
Depends on which treatment that I discussed, but yes, they can help or hurt. So almost all the eye drops make dry eye worse. The eye doesn't want those drops on it. They look at it kind of like they're toxic. I don't like that word because they're not really toxic. They're just not well tolerated on the eye. So those glaucoma therapies make dry eye worse. The good news is if you do a treatment that removes eye drops, that makes it better. So things like SLT, MIGS, we published a paper on that if you're getting patients off their eye drops, that can make glaucoma or dry eye better.
Thank you. Next question. Is there anything new for chronic uveitis with glaucoma?
Oh, uveitic glaucoma is tough. That's a tough condition. And it's tough because, a lot of times we want to treat it with steroids, which can help keep the uveitis under control, but steroids are known to make eye pressure go up too. So we walk a tight line there. The best thing to do with uveitic glaucoma, if you have access to a uveitis specialist and a glaucoma specialist, is them working in concert. There are some new drug delivery options for chronic uveitis, and I've got a couple of patients that are on them that seem to get the uveitis under control while not raising the eye pressure as much. So those are some, UTIs is the name of one of those medications. So I would look into that. They're usually implanted by retina specialists, and then the glaucoma side is managed by the glaucoma specialist.
Thank you very much. One of our audience members is asking, what's the name of the drug you mentioned after Durista that might be available this summer?
It's iDose. is the name of the product. The drug in it is travoprost. And it is available now as an FDA approved now. There is some insurance coverage in place. It's just not widely covered yet. So iDose, lowercase I, capital DOSE.
Thank you. And just to follow that question, the next question is that what is your feeling about iDose?
I'm very bullish on it. I've had a number of patients in my own hands, in addition to a really good understanding of the data. And the data looks very compelling to me. So I think that this is going to be a major advancement for glaucoma patients.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Here's the next question. What raises cerebral fluid pressure?
Really good question. There are some drugs that do it idiosyncratically. So raising CSF pressure can be good and it can be bad. There's a condition called IIH, idiopathic intracranial hypertension, previously known as pseudotumor cerebri, which is usually found in younger females, but not always, where the CSF pressure is too high. What we have found from those patients is that drugs, sometimes tricyclic antidepressants, caffeine, theophylline, and some other drugs in those families can idiosyncratically raise CSF pressure, but we don't know of one that can consistently.
Thank you.
Interestingly, Diamox, which is an oral medication that we use to lower IOP, not typically used in a chronic setting for glaucoma, but in an acute setting, also lowers CSF pressure. And those two fluids are very similar, embryologically and biologically. And so if we're changing those pressures in lockstep, a question could be, are we actually helping the glaucoma condition or not with a systemic medication that changes CSF pressure? My belief, although I don't have data to support this, is if the eye pressure is really high, it'll preferentially help eye pressure, even if CSF goes down a little bit. It's also used to treat it when CSF pressure is high, and you can lower that a lot where you're only lowering IOP a little.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Next question is, how do you get into a clinical trial?
Yeah, so if you are located around an academic center, oftentimes they're in clinical trials, but a lot of the studies are done in private practice settings as well. So, kind of know who the leading sites are around you, and then also know that it's a commitment, because a lot of times you'll have to come back 6 times, 12 times in a year. So if you're driving a lot to those places, it may not be doable or feasible. The other place that you can go is you can go on clinicaltrials.gov and see which clinical trials are occurring right now. So search glaucoma, and it should say if studies are currently enrolling. And then you can perhaps find out more information on which sites they're at, or you can contact the company and say, I'm a patient that would like to enroll. So those are the tips on getting there.
Thank you very much. Next question. Is it common for patients with high IOP but no glaucoma to be prescribed drops and SLT?
Yes, so yes, good question. Great question. That's what we call ocular hypertension. So these terms can get confusing, okay? So let's just break it down for a second. Glaucoma.
Mm-hmm.
And glaucoma is when there's actually damage to the optic nerve. And then from glaucoma, you can have open angle and closed angle glaucoma. And then within open angle glaucoma, there can be a whole bunch of other different subtypes. And one of those subtypes can be normal tension glaucoma. And that's where you have glaucoma, but you've never had a high eye pressure. Then you can have the opposite, where you have a high eye pressure and never get glaucoma. That's called ocular hypertension. Notice the word glaucoma isn't in it. There was a big study called the OATS study that showed that over a 5-year period, 90% of people that had a high eye pressure didn't get glaucoma over 5 years. But if you treated them, it increased the number of people that didn't get glaucoma to 95%. So we usually treat ocular hypertension if the pressure is above 24, depending on a couple other factors like how thick's your cornea. And so yes, eye drops and lasers are frequently used in ocular hypertension. And if it was my eye and my pressure was higher than 24, I'd want an SLT.
Mhm. Thank you
If
very
it was
much.
21 to 24, I'd probably ride it out.
Thank you. Okay, we have time for one more question. And my apologies to those whose questions we weren't able to answer. This is the last question. IOP goes up at night. Can this be mitigated or exacerbated by sleep position?
Yes, and it's not quite as simple as we would think. And I'm going to go a little bit off road here. Okay. So we know that if you're in the upright position, your eye pressure is the lowest.
Mhm.
Okay. As you lay down, your eye pressure goes up. Okay. So one thought would be, well, sleep in a chair. Your eye pressure won't go up as much. And that may be true. In fact, it is true that your eye pressure doesn't go up as much. However, if we're right about the CSF pressure topic, keep in mind that your cerebral spinal fluid pressure is the lowest when you're upright. And it's the highest when you lay down. And so it may be that you don't want to lay down or maybe even want to have your head and head down position to increase your CSF pressure relative to your eye pressure. There is no data that I'm aware of, and I'm pretty sure I'd be aware of it, that sleep position is related to glaucoma progression. Only that sleep position is related to what your IOP is. And if IOP is only part of the equation, we have to consider CSF pressure. So if you're asking me what to do on that, I would say sleep how you're comfortable and get a good night's sleep. We don't know.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We've come to the end of our webinar. I would like to thank Dr. Berdal so much for this amazing presentation. There's truly a lot of hope and a lot of light at the end of the tunnel vision for so many patients. And each year there are more discoveries and more hope for them. I would like to thank all the participants today and all the audience members. This webinar will be available on our website in a day or two, and also on our YouTube channel. So if you want to listen to it again, you will be able to. And please stay connected with the Glaucoma Foundation for newest treatment, for meeting with doctors like Dr. Berdal, and for helping us find cure for glaucoma. Thank you all so much, and have a good night. Bye-bye.